The Galactic Council's treachery doomed them. Humans gave one final warning. The warning. The lights in the Galactic Council chamber flickered, dimming as the massive room fell into hushed silence. Delegates from 100 starfaring civilizations sat in towering seats of polished obsidian, arranged in concentric rings around the central speaking platform. In the middle of it all stood Ambassador Elias Voss, the sole representative of humanity. His uniform was pristine, his expression carved from stone, yet his blue eyes burned with restrained fury. The weight of his species rested on his shoulders, and he knew what was coming. The verdict had already been decided before he even set foot in this chamber. A deep, guttural voice echoed from the highest seat. High Chancellor Xyrophon of the Zevani Dominion, an ancient reptilian species that had ruled the council for millennia, leaned forward with a predatory smirk. Humanity stands guilty of violating intergalactic order, Xyrophon declared, his slitted golden eyes glinting with satisfaction. By unanimous vote, the council has decreed that the Sol system is to be quarantined. A murmur rippled through the chamber, whispers, hushed conversations, and unreadable alien expressions. Voss didn't move. He had known this was coming. You mean blockaded? Voss said, his voice calm but firm. Xyrophon's smirk widened. The term is semantics, human. No ships will be permitted to enter or leave your solar system. Your people will be cut off from the wider galaxy, indefinitely. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Voss's jaw tightened. This was treachery. For decades, humanity had played by the rules. They had honored treaties, contributed to the council, and fought alongside allied species in wars they had no stake in. And now, betrayed. Voss scanned the chamber, looking at the so-called enlightened species that had stood beside humanity in battle, in trade, in diplomacy. Not one of them met his gaze. Cowards. I see, Voss said quietly. He took a slow breath, his fingers tightening behind his back. You understand what this means, don't you? Xyrophon leaned back, chuckling. It means the upstart primates will learn their place. No, Voss said coldly. It means you just signed your own death warrant. Silence. Then laughter. It started with the Zevani, their throaty, rasping laughs filling the air, followed by the droning chortles of the insectoid Varix and the clicking hisses of the Muldrex. The entire chamber mocked him. Voss didn't flinch. He simply exhaled as if he had expected nothing less. They had no idea what they had just done. When the laughter died down, Xyrophon shook his head in amusement. Your species is isolated, human. What do you think you can do? Fight us? You are alone. Voss smiled. And that was the last mistake they'd ever make. He reached into his uniform, pulling out a small holographic projector. With a flick of his wrist, a rotating blue sphere appeared above his palm. No, Chancellor, Voss said softly, staring at the image of his homeworld. We are never alone. Then he crushed the projector in his fist. A single pulse of blue light rippled outward. Every hollow display in the chamber flickered. The ornate council banners hanging from the walls rippled as if a great wind had passed through. And then, the lights cut out. A heartbeat of darkness. Then the emergency red lights kicked in, casting everything in a sinister crimson glow. Murmurs turned to shouts. Panicked voices overlapped in a dozen alien tongues. Xyrophon stood, his claws tightening on the stone podium. What is this? Voss's earpiece clicked. A voice, calm and unwavering, spoke into his ear. Omega Protocol confirmed. The noose is set. Voss smiled. The plan had been in motion long before he entered this chamber. You thought you could betray us, he said, turning to address the entire council. That we would just roll over and accept it. That we'd sit in the dark and let you cut us off from the stars. He took a step forward, his presence suddenly looming. You fools, he whispered. You've just made us dangerous. The main holo display flashed to life. It was a live feed. Earth's orbit. A collective gasp filled the chamber. The blockade had already begun. Dozens of alien warships surrounded Earth, their massive hulls bristling with weapons, their engines humming with restrained power. But something was wrong. They weren't moving. Xyrophon's eyes narrowed. What? Then the cameras zoomed in. The ships weren't just idle. They were drifting. Some had dark scorch marks along their hulls. Others had holes punched straight through their command decks. Then the transmission shifted. Inside one of the Zevani dreadnoughts, the bridge was silent. Bodies of the crew floated weightlessly, their expressions frozen in permanent horror. A single human operative stood among them, clad in black armor, a red stripe along his shoulder. A ghost of Earth's elite special forces. The The feed cut back to Voss. "This is what happens when you betray us," he said, voice unwavering. "You cut us off? We turn the isolation into a forge. You put a noose around our necks? We use it to strangle you." Xyrophon bared his teeth, fists clenched. "This is impossible." "How? You thought we didn't know?" Voss interrupted. "We've known for years. The council was always going to betray us." The screen shifted again. A countdown. 10 seconds. Xyrophon's frills flared in alarm. "What is that?" Voss tilted his head. "Oh, that. 9 seconds. That's the moment you realize you should have never crossed humanity. 8 seconds. You see, High Chancellor, we've been studying your fleets. Your security. 7 seconds. Your weaknesses. 6 seconds. And while you plotted our downfall, we prepared. 5 seconds. Did you really think we were just another species? 4 seconds. Did you think we weren't watching? 3 seconds. Voss's voice dropped to a whisper. Did you think we wouldn't strike first? 2 seconds. Xyrophon lunged forward. Voss, stop this. 1 second. The screens turned black. Then the feed changed one last time. Not a countdown. Not a warning. It was a single image. A human fleet. Thousands of warships, sleek and deadly, engines burning like stars. They had already left Sol. And they were coming. The Galactic Council chamber erupted into chaos. Xyrophon's breath hitched as the realization hit. They hadn't blockaded humanity. They had locked themselves in with them. And humanity had just declared war. The fires of betrayal. Panic spread like wildfire through the Galactic Council chamber. Delegates screamed in their native tongues, a chaotic symphony of fear. Some bolted for the exits, their flowing ceremonial robes tangling as they shoved and stumbled over one another. Others pounded their fists against the emergency consoles, demanding answers that would never come. But High Chancellor Xyrophon remained frozen, staring at the screen. The human fleet. It was an impossibility. The Sol system had been monitored, their shipyards logged, their supply chains meticulously analyzed. Where had those warships come from? Xyrophon's claws dug into the armrests of his podium, splintering the obsidian stone. This is a bluff, he growled. A human deception. But he didn't sound convinced. Ambassador Elias Voss stood unmoving at the center of the chamber. He adjusted his uniform, his motions deliberate, methodical, calm while everyone else burned. This is no bluff, Voss said, his voice cutting through the madness like a blade. You thought you were watching us? We were watching you. He began to pace, his boots echoing in the chaos. 4 years we listened to your whispers, Voss continued. We intercepted your encrypted transmissions, analyzed your logistics, studied every single one of your weaknesses. And the moment you betrayed us, we activated the contingency you never saw coming. Xyrophon snarled. You think a few ships can challenge the might of the Council's Grand Armada? Voss chuckled. Not a laugh of amusement. A laugh of pity. You still don't get it, he murmured. The main screen flickered again. This time the human fleet was moving, not towards the blockade around Sol but outward. Towards Council space. Xyrophon's breath caught. What? The blockade wasn't the target. The Council's core worlds were. Then, before Xyrophon could react, the lights in the chamber went out. A single second of total darkness. Then the emergency sirens blared. Flashes of crimson illuminated the chamber. Security droids, meant to protect the delegates, suddenly jerked and spasmed. Their eyes flickered between blue and red, then went dead. A voice crackled over the emergency comms. Security override detected. Central AI compromised. Council defense grid is. The transmission cut out. Silence. Then, boom. A tremor rocked the entire chamber, knocking some delegates to the ground. Xyrophon clutched the edge of his podium, his frills flaring in alarm. What was that? Voss tapped his earpiece. Status. A voice replied, calm and precise. Phase 1 complete. Council security systems offline. External defense grid compromised. Commencing Phase 2. Xyrophon's eyes widened. Earth had just taken control of the Council's own defense network. Another explosion shook the chamber. This time, a chunk of the ceiling collapsed, sending debris crashing down. Delegates shrieked, scrambling away from the falling wreckage. One of the insectoid Varix diplomats pointed a trembling claw at Voss. You wouldn't dare attack the Council directly. Voss met its gaze. We already have. A third explosion. This time not outside. Inside. A side wall detonated inward, sending shrapnel flying. Smoke and dust filled the air as figures stepped through the breach. Humans. Not diplomats. Not politicians. Soldiers. They moved like shadows, their black armor blending into the chaos. Helmets concealed their faces except for the red visors, glowing like fire in the dim light. Council guards barely had time to react. The humans struck first. A guard from the Avexi species, a towering four-armed colossus, raised his plasma rifle. Too slow. A human soldier closed the distance in an instant. One shot. A precise burst to the skull. The Avexi collapsed before it even registered its own death. The other guards fared no better. Within seconds, the Council's elite defenders were dead. Xyrophon reeled back. You can't do this." Voss turned to face him, calm amidst the carnage. "I warned you." Xyrophon's claws trembled. "You think killing us will save your species? You think humanity can survive alone?" Voss exhaled slowly, like a teacher disappointed in a foolish student. "We were never alone." The screen flickered again. A new transmission. This time it wasn't from Earth. Multiple signals. The face of an alien appeared, a Kvari warlord, his battle-scarred exoskeleton glistening under dim ship lights. Another screen, a Lokar admiral, her deep blue skin marked with the tattoos of her warrior caste. Another, a representative from the neutral Brask Imperium, their voice a low mechanical rumble. And more. Xyrophon's blood ran cold. All of them, non-human factions. All of them, standing with humanity. Voss watched Xyrophon's expression shift from fury, to confusion, to a dawning, terrible realization. "You really thought we had no allies?" Voss said, tilting his head. "No one to turn to?" He gestured to the screens. "These are the people the Council oppressed. The factions you stole from, manipulated, and discarded when they were no longer useful." Xyrophon shook his head, frantically. This is impossible. They would never side with you." Voss leaned in. "They didn't side with us," he whispered. "They sided against you." Xyrophon staggered. Then, the final screen changed. A live map. The human fleet had split into 3 groups. One set course for the Council's main shipyards. The second headed for the Council's military command stations. And the third. Xyrophon saw the trajectory and his heart stopped. They were coming here. A desperate, primal fear clawed at his chest. His mind raced. He needed time. He needed to stall. "Human," Xyrophon said, forcing his voice to steady, "you can still stand down. This doesn't have to end in war. The Council will." Voss raised a hand. And snapped his fingers. Behind him, his soldiers aimed their weapons. Xyrophon flinched. Voss spoke, his voice quiet but absolute. "No more deals. No more lies. No more Council." He turned, striding towards the chamber's exit, his soldiers falling into step behind him. As he reached the threshold, Voss looked back one last time. And he said the words that would be remembered forever. "You should have left us in the dark." Then the chamber doors slammed shut. And outside, in the void of space, the human fleet opened fire. The fall of the Council. Fire rained from the heavens. The first barrage struck the Council's orbital defenses, reducing them to molten wreckage in an instant. Planetary shields shimmered under the assault, their protective barriers groaning against the relentless onslaught of kinetic slugs and plasma bursts. Inside the Grand Chamber, chaos consumed everything. The Council's once mighty leaders, the same beings who had dictated the fates of entire species, were reduced to screaming cowards. They clawed at one another, desperately trying to flee the chamber, but the exits were sealed. Xyrophon's talons trembled as he slammed his fist against his private console. Override lockdown. Executive command, Xyrophon Prime 77. The console flashed red. Access denied. His throat went dry. Ambassador Voss had locked them in. Xyrophon spun around and found himself face to face with Varric's ambassador Triss, a towering insectoid being whose chitinous exoskeleton was now splattered with the blood of a lesser delegate who had been trampled in the panic. Triss hissed in fury. "You let them deceive us, Xyrophon. You swore the humans had no strength left. You doomed us all." Xyrophon bared his fangs. "Don't lecture me, you pathetic cretin." A deafening boom cut him off. The entire chamber shook violently. High above, the Council's orbital station detonated in a blinding explosion. Pieces of flaming debris rained down upon the capital city. Some chunks were the size of warships, leaving burning scars in the skyline as they plummeted like meteors. The planetary shields were failing. Xyrophon turned, desperate to find a way out. His mind raced. He needed to escape. He needed time. There had to be a way to survive this. He locked eyes with a nearby guard. "You, get me to my personal shuttle, now." But before the guard could even respond, a final explosion rocked the chamber. The roof gave way. A massive chunk of reinforced durasteel collapsed from above, crushing delegates where they stood. The air filled with screams and smoke as dust and debris swallowed everything. And then, they came. Through the shattered ceiling, black armored figures descended on repulsor harnesses, their weapons raised, their visors burning like crimson fire. The human strike teams had arrived. Xyrophan's blood ran cold. The first shots rang out. Precision bursts cut down council guards who attempted to mount a last, pathetic defense. A Lokar delegate, in a desperate act of survival, lunged for a fallen plasma rifle. A single shot to the head silenced him. Xyrophan felt the weight of inevitability crush him. The council was finished. And standing amidst the carnage, watching it all unfold with the patience of a predator, was Voss. The human ambassador turned warlord. His sidearm remained holstered. He didn't need to fire a shot. The weight of his victory was already pressing down on every soul in that chamber. Xyrophan, trembling, forced himself to step forward. His robes were torn, his dignity shattered, but he had to try. "Ambassador Voss," he rasped. "You must listen to me." Voss turned his gaze upon him, expression unreadable. Xyrophan took a shaky breath. "You've won. But you must know that if you—" he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "If you destroy the council completely, you create a void. You." Voss tilted his head. "A void?" Xyrophan nodded rapidly. "Yes. A void in power and leadership. You don't understand how delicate the galactic order is. If we fall, it won't just be humanity that suffers. It will be everyone. The chaos, the infighting." Voss chuckled. A dark, amused sound. Xyrophan stiffened. Voss stepped forward, closing the distance between them in a slow, deliberate pace. The sounds of battle raged around them, gunfire, explosions, screams, but Voss moved as if time itself obeyed him alone. He stopped inches away. And then he whispered, "Good." Xyrophan's entire body went numb. Voss turned away, gesturing to his soldiers. "Begin phase 3. Xyrophan's breath caught in his throat. "No. No, you can't." Voss looked back. And smiled. Then the final purge began. The sky burns. From orbit, the human fleet unleashed their final act of vengeance. The Council's core cities, once the greatest symbols of galactic power, became infernos. Orbital kinetic strikes sent shockwaves through the planet. Towers crumbled, entire districts vanished, and the arrogance of the Galactic Council was erased in fire and ruin. The warships of the human-aligned coalition joined the onslaught. Fleets of Lokar warbirds, Kvari dreadnoughts, and Brask devastators descended upon the Council's holdings like vultures. What had once been a monument to order and control was now a graveyard of power. Xyrophan watched it all from the ruins of the chamber. His empire was dead. His legacy, ash. And then, the final message came. A broadcast sent across the known galaxy. Voss appeared on every screen, his image burning into history itself. The Galactic Council is no more. His voice was calm. Absolute. Unstoppable. For too long you held the galaxy in chains. You played gods, dictating who thrived and who suffered. You thought yourselves untouchable. He leaned closer, as if speaking directly to every being who had ever suffered under the Council's rule. But now the galaxy is free. He let the words sink in. Then his final decree. Humanity is leaving. We will not rule. We will not rebuild your empire. We will watch, and we will remember. His eyes hardened. Do not make us return. The broadcast ended. The flames continued to rise. And across the stars, species who had once cowered under the Council's rule took their first breath of true freedom. The age of the Galactic Council was over. And humanity had burned the old order to the ground. The aftermath of fire. The skies above the former heart of the Galactic Council smoldered, thick with the smoke of fallen arrogance. The once pristine capital world, a bastion of power and control for centuries, was now nothing but a shattered husk. Buildings lay in ruin, streets were littered with rubble and bodies, and the great monuments of the Council's supremacy stood defiled, cracked, and crumbling. But the fires had begun to die. And in their place, a galaxy stood on the precipice of something new. Xyrophan stood at the edge of the ruined council chamber, his mind numb. His claws curled into the broken stone beneath him as he watched the devastation unfold. It was over. There was no rebuilding from this. No desperate counterstrike, no diplomatic maneuver that could undo what had been done. The council wasn't merely defeated, it had been erased. Xyrophon had spent centuries manipulating, controlling, ensuring that the delicate order of the galaxy bent to the will of the few. His entire existence had been dedicated to upholding the system. And now it was dust. The sound of boots crunching over debris made him turn. Boss. The human stood alone, his dark military fatigues dusted with ash, the faint glow of distant fires reflecting in his cold, calculating eyes. You? Xyrophon's voice barely worked. He had no power now. No army, no fleet, no leverage. And yet, even in this state, he felt the need to plead, to bargain, to understand. You could have taken their place, he rasped. Humanity could have ruled. Why leave it to chaos? Voss studied him, expression unreadable. Then he exhaled, slow and deliberate. That's the difference between us, he said. You think power exists to be hoarded. That civilization is something to be owned and controlled. He crouched slightly, leveling his gaze with Xyrophon's. You couldn't imagine a world where people choose their own fate. So you spent centuries making sure they never could. Xyrophon felt a spark of old anger, though it was powerless now. Do you think this will lead to peace? You think species will simply govern themselves? Without us, they will turn on each other. Wars will erupt. Billions will suffer. Voss didn't flinch. Maybe, he admitted. Or maybe they'll finally learn to stand on their own. He straightened. His job was done. Humanity's fleets were already preparing to leave. The banners of Earth, of the once defiant Terran Alliance, would not be raised here. There would be no new empire. Goodbye, Xyrophon. The former Grand Arbiter of the Galactic Council had no words left. He watched as Voss walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the fallen world he had helped create. And Xyrophon was left to face the end of everything alone. The last warship leaves. On the bridge of the UNS Vengeance, Captain Astor folded his hands behind his back, watching as the last of the Terran warships began their slow withdrawal from Council space. It felt unreal. The war had been fought and won, yet there was no victory celebration, no parade, no great proclamation of dominance. Only silence. Astor turned his gaze to the holographic projection of Earth, displayed proudly at the center of the bridge. They had done it. Against all odds, against the might of the oldest and most powerful galactic order ever created, humanity had fought back and torn it apart. But there was no joy in it. Only the cold understanding that they had done what needed to be done. A comms officer turned. Captain, final fleet withdrawal is confirmed. Do we issue a final transmission to remaining sectors? Astor hesitated. He could order a warning. A message to the remnants of the Council's forces, to ensure they never thought of revenge. Or he could say nothing. Let the actions of humanity speak for themselves. He closed his eyes. Send nothing, he said. We're done here. And with that, the last Terran fleet vanished into the stars. The birth of a new galaxy. The collapse of the Galactic Council unleashed a wave of chaos unlike anything the universe had ever seen. In the absence of absolute control, new powers began to rise. Some species, once crushed under the Council's boot, founded new civilizations, free to rule themselves for the first time in millennia. For some, it was a golden age. For others, it was a battlefield. The old loyalists, those who had benefited from the Council's reign, refused to go quietly. Civil wars erupted. Empires fell only for new ones to take their place. And through it all, humanity did not interfere. The Terran fleets vanished beyond the edges of known space, retreating into their own domain. Their message remained clear. We will not rule. But we will watch. And if the galaxy dares to repeat its mistakes, humanity will return. One final broadcast. Across 1,000 worlds, in the dim glow of forgotten cities and under the stars of a free but uncertain galaxy, a single transmission played for the last time. Voss's voice echoed across space. The age of control is over. You are free now. What happens next is up to you. The end.